Another anomalous trait UAPs seem to have is that they are transmedium.
Whoa, splash.
Transmedium just means that these objects are moving easily between different environments, such as space, our atmosphere, and even underwater. This video was taken from off the coast of San Diego, and the most notable feature is the ability to fly both in air and underwater. As soon as the object nears the water, they are waiting to mark the coordinates, the bearing and range of where this object went down, and they're, I don't know, I'm not sure. This video, I was like, I don't know that I can really, because there's nothing we have that's even remotely close to this, so I don't even really know what to say about it. It looks like it did go into the water. You think that the object has crashed. However, when submarines went to go look for the object, there was no trace of its remains. What's significant about that is that it probably has a capability to also travel under the water. We have nothing here in the United States anyway that can operate as both an aircraft and a submarine.
A recently leaked video of what is allegedly the radar screen aboard the USS Omaha might support the jaw-dropping assertion that this UAP dropped into the water and swam away.
Swam away.
Swam away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you call that when something can live on land and in water?
Oh, amphibious, like amphibious vehicle.
Yeah, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think at home? Let's start taking questions now. So we're back with Ben Stewart Podcast. Thank you guys so much. We took not even really a break last week. It was just a technical thing with equipment. So we're back on. This is going to be the second episode of Catherine Austin Fitz's kind of her take on where the money went. And we went halfway through it, and there was just so much to get into. Either that or Gordo and I like talking afterwards. We went pretty deep. It was pretty interesting. So I would, if you guys didn't see that one, watch this one, then go back and fill in all the gaps. So
yeah, definitely.
So this thing that you just showed us, tell us what this is.
So yeah, like you said, we're going to be still focusing more on the nuance and the important stuff behind following the money with all of these black budget and these things that deal with anything covert, in particular dealing with covert space assets. That could be deep underground military bases. That could be possible actual, spaceships type things, whether they're from off-world potentially, or just ones where reverse engineering that Lazar and people talk about. This one, though, is the most recent video that's kind of grabbing everyone's attention. So Corbell released another video with the radar images to help confirm these sightings, to get more forensic evidence. And I'm blanking, I don't know specifically where. This one might have been the one, I think, actually, where it was at the middle of the night in like the middle of the ocean. So that's why, people always say, why isn't the quality better? Because you got to understand the conditions of a lot of times these things, where they're being taken, extremely high speeds at the middle of the night in the middle of the ocean, where, just so people know, drones don't have a huge battery life, and they don't really have the ability to go hundreds of miles off the shore of the ocean and come back. So a lot of these things, you just really start to like, okay, let's just look at this objectively. What's your, skeptical argument? Let's look at the counterpoint. And a lot of people, like, I haven't heard anything that's really, really holding water. The drone theory, the spy plane, all that. A lot of people just say, yeah, it's really weird, it's unidentified, but I'm going to stop there because X, Y, and Z reasoning. Once you kind of admit and take the red pill that this is really potentially ET stuff, it is it's a psychological thing in a lot of ways, I see. To me, sometimes
it's totally a psychological thing.
It doesn't seem like the evidence sometimes.
I also get that some people, they want to rule out other things first. And I got to be honest, this isn't like aliens walking out of a spaceship on, like on the White House lawn. It's not definitive like that. It's something that these cameras are picking up. And I fully have considered the opportunity or the possibility that this is extraterrestrial. I'm also consistently going over and over in my head, what else could this be? I'm not just looking at the media like what's their angle, even though that's part of what I do. But right now I'm also thinking like, what do we not know about modern technology? And like, who would this be connected to? You got to think of like, people need their Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They need first fed and they need a house, shelter. And then they need to feel safe. And I think that's where people are in their rationale going over what could this be? Am I being lied to? Because like a lot of, a lot of people that I relate to are also in the I just don't know what I trust out there as far as the story. And for me, I could do an entire Waking Infinity News on trust being not something you need to give outside of yourself. You trust your discernment and your ability to be able to maneuver what you're discerning.
I think that's
and
key.
I think we give our trust away too much.
Right.
Yeah.
Personal discernment is really the key. And I think it's a core theme of all the content, we're trying to produce is, critical thinking, independent thinking, but it doesn't mean you can't have, interdependent thought. It doesn't mean you can't throw ideas off others. I think it's critical, this whole idea of the echo chamber, like you need to have pushback, you need to challenge. So, as we said from the get of this whole series, like decide for yourself. We're just putting the puzzle pieces out there. We're letting you connect the dots how you see fit. Everyone has a slightly different perspective on this, and nobody knows 100%
except for
what's
the back
going
that
on.
is big.
Yeah, I mean,
everyone at least agrees on that this means something.
Yeah, and when you look at the money and all these elements to it, like this is serious amounts of money missing. This is seriously game-changing physics and technology we're looking at. And, even this pilot at the end of that video says, this is breaking a lot of the laws of physics. And, it's like, okay, so we'll leave it at that. But even leaving it at that, you just see it's like we're right on this teetering point, I feel like. And no one really wants to dive into the deep end yet. Some people are more down to like say, I'll put it out there, I'll speculate here. But I really feel like we're at this teetering point where everyone's like, it's kind of like Copernicus is like, or like a Galileo theory being like, it's getting harder to disprove this guy Copernicus and Galileo. Like it sounds really out there what he's saying, but I feel like, that is kind of this moment. We're at another precipice point.
I feel it. I've talked about the fourth turning before and the 80 to 90 year cycle where crisis periods come up and usually it leads to war. I take a look at that as like most people don't think in 90-year terms, but also we don't think in maybe like a couple 100-year terms. Whereas like when was that? 1400s, 1500s, Copernicus, Galileo. I know they weren't alive at the same time, were they?
No.
This is where my history breaks down.
Yeah,
but you know what? Like several hundred years of time cycles, I kind of feel like we're always moving into different cultural and societal paradigms. Like if you think about it, like, and we will get into the economics of it, but I was just thinking the other day, something about, the economics of where blockchain is going and things that we can't even conceive of. The platform is here, but we can't conceive of where that's going to go. And then when you look at things like centralized, we know what that means, and decentralized, we think we know what that means. And then there's distributed, and that's like equally distributed. And there's like economics in there. One looks like oligarchy, one looks like anarchy, one looks like I don't know, maybe socialism or equal distribution. There's things that we can't even foresee that technology is going to change, I think, in the very near future. So I wouldn't discount technology here. However, I also know that most of us, when we say aliens or ETs, we typically think in a very narrow category of what that could mean, like what kind of a creature it must look like, what it must be capable of. And I don't think we fully understand, but we're getting there with people talking about, can you, co-localize your consciousness into technology, that potentially this may not even be the full anatomy of an ET traveling, but it could be somewhat drone, psychologically controlled. Who the hell knows? So the thing is like what I love about this is it's at least all over the world, at least here in the US, everyone's talking about it. I'm not really seeing how other countries are viewing this. Maybe I should ask you that, how are other nations viewing what's coming out now in the US?
That's a really good question. I haven't really looked at it from like a foreign affairs perspective or international affairs. I know the U.S. usually in general is, once we kind of lead on anything, a lot of other countries sort of feel it's okay to follow, especially with national security stuff, because, we kind of are the big dog on the block when it comes to the world stage, just from our sheer size of our military. So, I've looked at a lot of the history of what other governments have said about UFO, UAP incidents, and certain governments are much more open about it. Certain South American countries in particular. France has been pretty open. But ultimately it always hits some like hard block. You know, they'll go only to a certain limb, and I think what I'm getting at is if the U.S. does make a major step in this June big task force hearing, then it will give a lot of grounds for a lot of other major G20 world powers to do the same. They will follow our lead. I really do feel this way, considering the petrodollar and just how much we really do control the global economy in a lot of ways. And, you know, you're seeing even countries like China, for instance, which, you know, could really give two Fs about what we do in a lot of ways. They haven't come out and said anything either, you know, and they're going to the dark side of the moon. They're doing their thing, but like the general rule of thumb, whether they've talked about it or not, is very like, let's keep it hush hush. Like very need to know. We don't need to tell the public anything except like minimal viable stuff to get them to stop asking questions. And so China hasn't come out and said anything with this. You know, Russia said some strange things before. They have previous things said by the ambassador about like they know about ETs and there's various things. But bottom line, like we're at a point where like all those things that were, you know, the evidence, all this evidence before this, video, photos, interviews, anything, none of that really compares just from a purely like credibility angle to the masses as what's happening now. You know, like for instance, even people like, I'll just get personally, or my brother, who's a very big skeptic, works in the government. He's finally like admitting to UFOs being a real thing because the Pentagon has said it. He's very much like, if the Pentagon says it, then I'll be down with it. Then I'll agree. And there's a lot of people, especially in the bureaucratic public sector, they really just, that is their real lead they follow. So this is big for that reason. It's hitting out everyone, you know?
I think that's got to be a fundamental, almost like archetypal aspect of what this is doing. Is it's causing for us to even, what you just said right there is I mean, it's when you look at the way most people, they look at, are they safe first, then they'll hunt the truth. I guess what I'm saying is like a lot of people, they feel safer in the herd than they do on the fringe seeking for truth.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
so that's why
in us.
You'll have politicians and like you'll have people that are policy holders, and their first. Again, this is a very broad blanket statement, but thinking in that way, they think of their pension, they think of their family, they think of like, well, if I believe this to be true, what does that mean? I have to make a moral decision whether I stand by it.
An economic decision, like you said.
What's going to happen with my kids and stuff like that, you know?
That's a huge part of it.
Herd mentality, we are in such a distributed liability system that I remember when people, and I'm not going to try and like tie anything today as to what was going on in Nazi Germany, but like when we hear about these things in history and we're like, how could any human do that to another human? Oh, we can justify a lot of hideous things if we have the most clever, eloquent justification. We could justify doing the most terrible things because like if you show where the victim is, like we're the victim here, you know, we need to protect ourselves and it's all about my kids and I will get nasty, you know, and most people can understand that, but like the nuances of how that plays out, I guess what I'm saying is like what news like this could mean for the very near future is that more people catch wind that our own politicians, by and large, are more likely to take the safe bet for their family than they are to go for truth. And the more stuff like that starts to become obvious, I almost feel like all of this is going to have to really start changing in the next few years as we start reconsidering our position in the universe. And I want to get into Catherine Austin Fitts. I don't want to go too long, but like, this is big. Let's just put it, a cap on it right there.
Yeah.
This is huge. Nobody is saying that this is just smoke and mirrors. There's a reason why this is happening.
Yeah. And just to tie that in a knot, like I truly, I mean, we know, Yuval Harari has written some amazing books all about sapiens and our history, and everyone knows we are very much tribal herd species, and it is primal, ingrained in us from the earliest hunter-gatherers to, if you get separated from the herd for whatever reason, you're injured, you're exiled, you're most likely going to die. You know, strength in numbers was very important for a large percentage of the Homo sapien history. So that's still very much ingrained in us. The same with the amygdala, to be afraid of a saber-toothed tiger. You know, we've been hijacked with all these new things. So yeah, that's a big part of it, is the psychological component. And I don't take that lightly. You know, when I talk to somebody who especially is skeptical, because this is serious stuff, like as far as how it could impact people if they start kind of accepting these things. And it's cool if people aren't ready yet. I get it, because you'll feel safer once the masses are more into it, and the people who lead the masses, these institutions that have that sort of institutional power, it will, I think, give people more of an opportunity to be like, okay, now I'm cool with it. So it's exciting in a lot of fronts. And Catherine has been spearheading this, as we said. She has an amazing, impressive background and bio, working as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She's been in Wall Street. She's run amazing, top-notch hedge funds. But, whether you like Wall Street or money or not, she is an expert in a lot of those things. Extremely qualified on following the money, because she did it and still does it for a lot of subscribers with the Solar Report. So, jumping now into the discussion she had with Dolan, and Copernicus was 1473 to 1543.
Okay.
So here's a great interview she had with Dolan. It's in the show notes. Everyone wants to listen to it full length. Please, I highly recommend it, checking it out. But just them going more into the minutia and the details of this missing money, where it goes, a lot of the key things we touched on last episode. This is an extension of that, really just diving deep into it. So they're going to dive into more just specifically this 21 trillion and how they exactly, again, they calculated this and where it's going.
The hard part for many people to realize, if there's 21 trillion missing, how come I didn't notice?
21 trillion, that's the big thing. So I remember in 2001, this was just before you and I got to know each other, but that was when famously Donald Rumsfeld, then Secretary of Defense, in the summer of 01, the Bush people were brand new in the White House. You could say they had no skin in the game in reporting all of these discrepancies because they were new. So he goes to Congress and then reports to the House Armed Services Committee $2.6 trillion that were undocumented expenditures, or however and then by September 10th, it became $2.3 trillion. And then boom, comes September 11th.
Well, it's interesting because I was working with a reporter on a big cover story about the missing money.
Right.
And it was going to publish the Friday after 9/11. And the day before, Rumsfeld came out and did what we assumed was a modified hangout. There's 2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon, and it's terrible, this and that. And we thought, it's funny, I talked to the reporter that afternoon, and I said, nothing's going to stop this story from going mainstream now. Well, of course, the next day was history. And the number then, in fact, was 4 trillion, because you have 1.1 trillion either the year before or after. And I remember when you and I first talked, we talked about 4 trillion and thinking that was so big. And every time I see you, it just keeps getting bigger.
Well, but like the Pentagon's budget for 2001, I remember this, was 310 billion.
Right.
So 2.3 trillion is almost 8 times that amount. So one thing I've always wondered is how do you lose 8 times your annual budget?
If I'm right, the total tax take from Americans was 1.6 trillion. So you're losing more than 100% of the taxes that the American people pay.
All right. So you start to realize, like, 100% of the taxes, you're hearing these numbers, I think it's 10 times our, defense budget. And it's a critical thing for people to understand, because it helps to validate the assertion made by Kaplan that we live really in an open economy. We don't have actually a closed economy, which is what, I was taught in college in economics. Most people think we have, but it's this idea that we actually have sort of a window open, metaphorically speaking, and money is just flying out the window as you're driving, right? So where is all this money going? Because if it was 21 trillion being, directly coming right back into our economy, we would have hyperinflation. We'd have, like a Zimbabwe type scenario, right? Where money basically becomes almost useless because it's so inflated. Mm-hmm. So it's clearly being spent, and there's these sneaky ways they can get it back into the economy and benefit from creating the tech and reverse engineering and then introducing it. A lot of people say, early things like Teflon and microwaves and certain laser and all these things, like, the word on the street was potentially it was actually reverse engineered tech from something more advanced. I don't know if that's true, but that's sort of one way it could be reintroduced. There's a lot of fancy financial ways you can reintroduce it, but the bottom line is they are spending this money. 21 trillion is not just sitting there. And that type of money, like we said in the last episode, is not just you buying a new yacht or a nice little estate offshore. This is serious, like a whole new department of defense type money, an entire, what they would call a breakaway civilization or an entire deep state. It's this unaccounted world that has an insane amount of budget going to it and this really shady way of getting access to the funds and being able to say, screw off when somebody like a president even says, hey, what's really going on over here? I heard some rumors. You're on a need-to-know basis, or even to where security clearance and presidents are sometimes denied. Famously, George Bush Sr., I think said you got to get the approval from the Library of Congress. He might have said that to Clinton or Carter. But you hear these stories and you hear these numbers, but I mean, did that kind of stick out to you, just the sheer?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's huge. You look at 2021 federal budget, it's just under 5 billion today. I mean, 21 billion, or trillion, sorry. Trillion, 21 trillion. Well, that's the thing. It's such a large number. We don't use trillions in anything. Do we use that in astronomy?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we've got trillions of stars and, like.
Right. So that's
universes.
the only. I guess it's in context. You could be talking about grains of sand here and everywhere in the universe that there may be, but I'm just saying, like, where else do you even think of these numbers? How many people day to day are considering things in the trillions? So the thing is 21 trillion missing. Most people have no concept of what that could even get you, right? Yeah. It's so big. Who knows what that could even get you? And I'm looking here, I'm also curious, like a lot of that, there's 10,000 underground military facilities, and that's worldwide.
That we know of. Right.
Well, that we know of. And that's just talking about military underground facilities.
Right.
That's specifically classified there. So it's curious what that could do and what we would see. And for sure, it would have to come out some way. I have no doubt in my mind that, lasers, that's a part of the first quantum revolution, microwaves, and what did you say, Teflon, all this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know the specific years of each one, but there was, it seemed like there was kind of a surge at one period. It's tough. I mean, tech is always exponentially increasing, but we're still innovative, but it seemed like there were some years where a lot came at once. But I mean, that's just kind of,
we
all
also
relative.
Don't think in long timelines. Like, humans, we think in probably like a couple year timelines, maybe then 15-year cycles if you're old enough. But as technology comes out, like, how long has part of this agenda to understand what this phenomena is? How long has it been around? How many, it didn't just all of a sudden pop up. It probably morphed from another demographic and another group. And so I guess the curious thing about this is, like, 21 trillion, like, how would that stack the deck? It's very interestingly stacking the deck. And this is just showing us that, like, we didn't even notice 21 trillion missing. What does that mean?
Well, then that's a really good astute point, because the only way you really, and I might be slightly wrong here, but just from the best I can do with my background, the only way you could really pull that off is if you have the ability to infinitely print money. I don't really think you can pull that off if we're on a gold standard. I don't think you can really pull that off unless you have, the ability to literally just print money based off of just purely the speculation of how strong America is, essentially, right? It's just, our money is really just based off of the sheer confidence of people in the dollar. And so, you really, like I said, inflation and all these things, you start to see, like, why did we get off the gold standard? And you start to see these things happen as it starts to see maybe some threads. And obviously you don't want to just pull, like, I forget the term, when you see patterns just to see patterns. Apophenia. Like, you have to obviously be mindful of, like, okay, am I just trying to see a pattern because I want confirmation, and confirmation bias is real? And, I've had great friends who've always kept me in check with that. I'm like, yeah, like, I do have bias in this. I do want this to be true about advanced life.
We all do.
Right. And so it's okay.
I got mine, and it always comes back to the Great Reset. So
yeah. I mean, it's just important to know that and keep that in check with yourself, because I'll see people on both sides be too skeptical or too just believing anything. But ultimately, like I said, if you look at this like an investigative journalist or a lawyer arguing a case in a courtroom, I really just try to get as much evidence together as if I was arguing in a court of law to say exhibit A, B, C. The most recent things are probably the strongest pieces of evidence. If you were a lawyer, like, these are your sort of your main big ones you'd really rely on to prove your sort of closing argument. But essentially, we can't deny hardcore empirical objective stuff, like this money, like it's saying how much more it is than our total budgets, like the total accumulated amount they call unaccounted adjustments, was just a BS way for accounting terms to say we don't know where the hell it is. We like we're gonna call it this term, part of generally accepted accounting principles, but really it's just a way for them to say I don't know, but I'm not gonna figure it out and pass the buck. And they say, oh, try to audit us, we failed, and all right. Because they don't really want you to be able to see and transparency around these things, because there's a lot of really tough questions they'd have to answer. And that's why, I've always, with everything happening right now, and I give a lot of props to Cigar and Jetty. He was just on Rogan talking about this too. Like, he really made a strong case for this and showed the evidence nicely, linearly, of like how this really isn't, the government is kicking and screaming with a lot of this. Like with Mellon and Lou Elizondo, say what you want about those guys, and I've seen various people saying, this psyop type stuff, but like a lot of this, the government did not want it to come out and did not want it to go this way. And yes, they're going to try to control the narrative and take it, since they have to. Of course, they're going to try to spin it whatever way that's going to justify, most likely, trying to weaponize a war in space. But a lot of the indicators don't, when you look at the history of false flags, and you and I both study the law, like this, a lot of those indicators, this isn't seeming like that. And it doesn't mean, look, that they don't necessarily have something in their hat for this type of situation where, for instance, faking some sort of ET invasion. Like I literally, and let's just have a little fun real quick on this. The newest movie is this Chris Pratt movie. I'm blanking. It's called like Time Wars. And I just saw a preview for it. And it's literally like, we've got to come together as a world and fight these really vicious, gnarly aliens. And people from the future come back to like present day, and they're like recruiting. They're like, we need you to come fight these aliens in the future who are crushing us. And it's just like really like, like it's all about like whatever. It's a July 4th movie, Independence Day. I get that there's part of marketing and during the summer blockbuster or something for sure. But I was kind of like, this is kind of like a little on the nose, like almost like prepping us to be like, yo, these aliens are so gnarly and scary, and let's fight them. And like, I don't know. There's a lot of like, 90% of all ET stuff is always negative, right? So
yeah, like honestly, like you're kind of forcing me to say it. So to me, the reason why you would have mainstream centralized media is to keep a narrative straight, to keep the story on the straight and narrow. Because the thing is when I was talking about we could justify hideous stuff with the right justification, the bottom line is to me, I've studied enough to know that history tells us we're not above ethnic cleansing. We're not above genocide. And, that doesn't mean that there aren't a small group, potentially causing all of it. And it's just their fault. And we just need to get rid of them. But we're very good at coming up with the enemy. That's like, partly we pointed at psychology and just humans aren't evolved enough. And then at the other times we're like, no, it's that group or that group or that group. But the bottom line is, if a story could be staged, and I always look for, is it possible, and would the motive be there to stage something like this? It wouldn't be the government. It would, like, the government is like one thing, but it's many people it's
many
different
moving parts,
buildings,
departments.
Yeah, many moving parts, and people are kind of like, they're hemmed in by things that we think they have carte blanche to just rule us, but they don't. They have to have paperwork and all that crap.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is we also know that there's a technocratic and also like very wealthy Silicon Valley arm to this. And then the same thing exists in China. You would call that the bats and the fangs, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And then you have over here, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, which their parent is Alphabet. So like power is distributed. There are many factions of power, but the bottom line is like, to me, when you're saying like with the Time Wars thing, and we need help defending ourselves against this other threat, whether it be external aliens or we got hacked to death and our entire infrastructure shut down, and we went 3 weeks during the hottest weeks of summer without any food, any water, any fuel moving around, and people went into pandemonium. The whole tangent I'm going into is the mainstream media. their job is to hold the narrative. Here's who to blame. Here's how you distribute the liability, all the anger you're feeling for this, insane thing that just happened to us. Here is where you can direct that.
Yeah.
That's why I don't trust mainstream media, is because it's so organized that when something like this is coming out, I'm like, there is an angle. No matter what, there is an angle. There's something that it is supporting, and it bothers me when I can't pinpoint what it is. And so really the best tool that I've come to find is like, okay, keep following the research as much as you can, and then also always at the same time practice all the unconditional love, all those things that are timeless. And then there's the timely things that need, all the nuts and bolts and the evidence that we need to dive into, that we're going to now that we're done with this tangent.
No, I feel you.
With Catherine Austin Fitts. But like, that's kind of, this is where my mind like does not stop. I'm not convinced about anything, and I'm very skeptical, but I'm also not beyond believing that any of the possible belief categories could be true. Yeah. So like, that's just my way of saying we need to stay.
It's the Buddha Eightfold Path, right? Right thought, right thinking. It's having, that sort of moderate, balanced perspective.
Right. Because I feel like something big is coming. Like, I feel like something big is coming. And that's why I want to say this.
Yeah.
And, I guess the grand point, if I could, make it succinct so we can get back to Catherine Austin Fitts, is like, as we hear narratives on who to blame for what's happening and what is to come, keep mindful that the heart never wants to find more reasons to hold hate. It doesn't. The brain can be brainwashed into thinking it, and then sometimes the heart is held captive by that. I want to remind people, we love putting people's heads on the chopping block. I'm actually very curious what the hell's going on with Fauci and Bill Gates. Like, were they set up to be the fall guys? Is this a part of the way the narrative was meant to go? So we have someone to blame for the ails of history? I don't know. Like,
we know in history, a good scapegoat, they never try to let go to waste. We know in history we had the Colosseum, and people love blood sports. Like, you could argue the NFL is kind of the modern day version of that. And look, I don't mind watching a good NFL game, but like, let's be honest, like when we're tapping into our primal root instincts of like, yeah, I just want to see like a hard hit or something. and so like, these are also distractions though. Let's be mindful. It's like, cool. Yeah, I'm being distracted right now. I'm accepting that. I'm owning that.
Yeah.
But all at the same time, it's not going to mean I'm not going to still hold truth to the fire and do, when I'm not watching football, then I'll check out some documentary, some cool, person I like in independent media. So you can have balance. And I've never been like, it's extreme of one or the other, but
right.
But everything's cyclical, man. Everything, it is very cyclical. And right now though, that's the big thing, where is this a new cycle? Is this going to be the start of a new cycle? So Catherine now,
shit, I hope that didn't come out loud for you guys. I'm opening up the comment section on YouTube. We're about to get real.
All right. So Dolan,
trying to interest people.
Sorry, I thought I got rid of all the ads already. 1 sec. All right.
In this, and Dr. Skidmore hears me, and he says, "Well, she must be wrong. It's too big. It's too big a number." So Lee Camp in his presentation said, the total stock market is 30 trillion. How can, this is 2/3 of the entire global stock market. So actually the entire global stock market is 80 trillion, but the US stock market is about 27 trillion. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he decided to look into it, and he got the documents. They're all available publicly, and found out I was correct. It was 6.5 trillion. He was shocked.
Right.
So he emailed me and he said, would it help if I got my grad students and we went through very systematically all the documents from 1998 to 2015 at DOD and HUD? Because I had found some, but I hadn't done it systematically. I think at that point I was up to 12 trillion. Okay, so
you were doing this on your own, going through the records.
Right, but sporadically. Mm-hmm. And I always figured 12 trillion was enough to get everybody to focus on this, but apparently I was
wrong.
You would
think so. You would think 12 trillion is a lot of money.
Right. So he gets his grad students. And the one thing I said to him, we want to publish all the supporting documentation so other researchers can access this and work on this.
Yes.
But before we publish it, I want to get all the documents up on multiple servers, and so we're not dependent on their websites. He thought I was being a little cautious.
A little paranoid, perhaps.
A little cautious. But I've been to this movie before, so
yes.
So he and his team did an amazing job, and he would call me, Richard, and he would say, "Oh my God, we found another trillion. Oh my God. So finally he publishes a study at 18.5 trillion because he can't imagine they're going to find more. And then he keeps calling it, oh my God, it's another trillion. And then we hit a magic moment because he went over 20 trillion to 21, which meant it was more than the outstanding public debt, which at the time was 20 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a bell because it basically said all of the debt is hooey in a sense from a financial standpoint. Anyway, so he publishes the study and other writers get interested. One of the writers at Forbes did an article about it. And the OIG at both HUD and DOD.
OIG is the Office of the Inspector General. Yeah.
Take down the documents. Not the controller's office. The controller office left theirs up, to their credit. But the OIG offices took them down. Now, it didn't matter because our primary links were to the documents. I had the documents loaded up on servers all around the world. And I multiple
Yes,
copies.
you weren't being paranoid, were you?
No. Well, but here's the thing. Dr. Skidmore was really shocked. Because it was such a... Anyway, he was very shocked. That told him, okay, there's something here. And then he was in trying to get information from the OIG, and on a variety of occasions, the explanations were just deeply unsatisfactory. And that's when he realized, okay, major problem here.
And it's unbelievable. See, you mentioned the debt, which at least at that time was roughly $20 trillion. This exceeded that by $1 trillion. So, right, your point, the debt is hooey. I assume you mean in the sense that this missing money could pay for the debt, completely pay for the debt.
Right. And it's really scary when you look at the pension funds, because the number one buyer of Treasury securities worldwide, it's not China, it's our pension funds. So if you look at all the retirement savings, there's $25 trillion of retirement savings and pension funds in the U.S. Treasuries are a major, major holding. And when you step back and look at the whole system, we did our annual wrap up on the pension funds. Our pension funds buy $10 trillion of treasuries. The money disappears out the back door. And what do we get? We get an IOU from, Treasury securities, which is an IOU from ourselves. So we put in $10 trillion of real money and we get back a debt from ourselves. And the money disappears out the back door.
Boy, most...
Yeah, you got to breathe through all this material because it's very easy to make it can infuriate you because you're starting to realize how much, I want to say how much if this is true, but a lot of this is pretty it's pretty public knowledge. So it's like when you're passing the total national debt 20 plus then 21 and you're passing that amount. It's like one of these things we're talking about. This is a major paradigm shift. It's almost as much as just the sheer fact that the ETs exist. It's like, so then what are you telling me about our economy and the entire history of our economy up to this point? If you're telling me that we could pay it completely off right away with the amount of money that's missing, those kind of things.
Right. To me, what that tells me is that the system was intended to be a debt system. I mean, so I'm sure you heard about the people in certain mining outfits. The whole racket of that was they would get hired and then they would have to pay for certain stuff like gloves and required things that they needed to go into the mines. And there wasn't a way, long story short, there wasn't a way for them to get out of debt.
Yeah, indentured slavery.
Yeah. Right. So because they would feed them too, and you got to pay that back. And so the thing is this to me is just more sophisticated. Why did it need to get more sophisticated? Because we maybe started getting more hip to it. Information was shared more freely. Now we have the internet. We need very, very, very sophisticated ways of explaining why we're going to work until we die. And why some people have far more than us, because I don't know if you've looked into David E. Martin when he's talking. I mean, he personally is talking about life insurance companies are actually the real ones behind everything that's going on right now. And to me, I'm just okay, I think that's, yes, thank you for pointing out another part of the whole thing that seems to be happening. But, the grand scheme of it, he was starting to point out, listen, I'll break it down for you. Every aspect of life insurance and mortgages, 30-year mortgages. In 1904, when the 30-year mortgage, he was saying the 30-year mortgage was started around then. That was the life expectancy of a blue-collar worker. So you could have somebody pay off a property almost or completely off, and then you get to foreclose on their house when they die. So that does sound like a racket that's not beyond my imagination.
There's rackets all over the place. I mean, if they can create a racket.
This sounds like the whole economy is a racket. Yeah. The whole economy is a racket.
Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated Marines of all time, highly recommend. He has a famous quote, war is a racket. So much is a racket of what we've been told is actually, we're told it's authentic and it's fair and it's justified and it's designed to create this holistic outcome. When a lot of it is it's a rigged economy. It is very much. I mean, and like I said, once we got off the gold reserve and really went into fractional reserve lending is what it's called. And it's the idea of debt-based slavery, which you're pointing to. Essentially, you can look, and you got into some of your old docs with maritime law, and the United States is being designated as a corporation, and like liens, and it seems like the goal is basically and BlackRock is doing this right now in the housing market. They're buying up every single house, cash dollars, 100K over a lot of times, and it's because it's getting to a point where all the real assets are going to be owned by a very small amount of transnational conglomerates, private billionaires, and major conglomerate companies. And, they want everyone, and they're already putting articles out there to be like, oh, like millennials and the next generations are cool with not owning anything and just renting everything. And just like, it's this complete idea, though, of like, you literally have nothing that you own anymore. No real hard assets. Everything's either digitized, credit on, and so there's only so much you can obviously push and say, okay, now I'm speculating, or now I'm that this is a theory that I have. But even just looking, you don't need to get conspiratorial or even say this is a theory. Just the stuff that is public knowledge that we do know, like this, it makes you have to go like, okay, I really do need to maybe look at this harder or reassess what I've been taught and told and do my own due diligence, because this doesn't line up. There's a cognitive dissonance. There's a disconnect, and I don't understand it, but I need to figure it out. And that's
There is one balancing point that I want to say to my own point, and what that is like, I know it must come across some way that I am just ragging on the economy, that I am just ragging on all economic models, I'm ragging on government, and that's really not it. And I also can sympathize because, okay, when people on the right are saying we're turning into a socialist country and look at socialism, it's never worked before, that doesn't mean anything to me, because when you look at how a plan can fail, every business model in the world can fail. And if you focus on how it can fail and what it entices people into, it to me, that's really what it does. What does it make it easier to happen? Right. And what is capitalism? I'm not ragging on capitalism or socialism or any of the economic models, because for the most part, we haven't seen one economic model, and perhaps I'm forgetting a society in history, but to my knowledge, we haven't seen one economic model where we've actually seen it premium optimized, working where everyone is working together. That seems like the utopian world everyone says is impossible. Right. And most of us, getting back to that trust thing, we just don't know how to trust that we're not being screwed. That's one of the main things that I see about conspiracy theories that irk me, is we don't know how to actually trust something that we in the past called an enemy. We don't know how to get over it. And we're like the once bitten, always shy. Always shy from that point on. Oh, is it called IRS? I don't trust it. Why? Because of stuff in the past I can point out. And that means you need to change your branding before I will ever, trust those people. No, those people, they're out. We need new people, new branding, everything. And that's how most people are. The burn it down to the ground before I will ever trust how it rebuilds itself.
Well, it's
this
tough
is
because
a tricky situation.
I know. Well, it's tough because I do empathize with a lot of people who feel that, though, because a lot of our right now, institutional confidence is at all-time lows. The institutional failure has been pretty systemic, and it was shown in very full colors with the past COVID pandemic. And a lot of people don't trust the institutions for good reason, because they have really exploited and taken advantage of what they're supposed to do. I'm not saying it's every single person within that institution, but especially people in positions of power have, the idea of the revolving door and conflict of interest with private interests and people who don't care about the masses, but their own little small select niche of the pie. We have allowed a lot of that, but how do you get back people's trust? You have to earn it, right? You have to take actions to show that you are trustworthy again. And that's where this is a time we're giving them an opportunity, and they could take it and run with it and gain a lot of trust back, and people could really become empowered and united, and we could really enter a really badass new age for humanity. I'm skeptical of them doing that. I think we can push them, and I think we should to do that and say, hey, you can earn back your trust. Tell us really what's going on here. And for instance, with UAPs, tell us really what's going on behind the scenes with this missing money. they could earn the trust back.
Disclosure doesn't feel like disclosure, does it? You
Well,
know,
it's
so
partial
far, it
disclosure.
feels like breadcrumbs.
This is
It
yes,
feels like
right.
breadcrumbs.
This is controlled disclosure. This is partially dripping it out so that they can maintain keeping a certain narrative. Because if they put it all out there, they're not going to be able to maintain that narrative. There's no way they're going to be like, no, like don't look over here though. Like, but wait,
you have to control response.
Yeah.
You have to control the response of people.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'll say is like, dude, I absolutely agree that there is, I mean, like in our government now, there is absolute corruption. And I believe there has been so much corruption in governments prior. And I also feel like there is this timeless struggle where it's not 100% government's job to make sure we live in a paradise. It's also the people's. Yeah. And I think the people forget that because we can't conceive of how we're doing it wrong because we're out of control. They're the ones in control. And then from potentially, and I'm not saying this is how it's going, but potentially from a governmental, not who's really behind the scenes, who's really controlling. I'm just saying US government. They're just a bunch of people who are probably seeing that like, well, you know what? We come up with mask mandates and things. And I mean, like, I thought a lot of that was BS too, but you know, this is just a thought experiment. We came up with a lot of regulations and people bitched and complained the entire way through it. They barely took our advice and they were just complaining. It's like they were not on board. And as a parent, I'm not saying that this is an exact parallel, but like when I'm trying to like set up a game, something super fun, and my kids they don't realize the nuance of the game I'm trying to play, and they ruin it, and it ends with all of us in tears screaming at each other. Part of that is them, part of that is me, and part of it is just like this was a learning experience. So I try to go a mythological step above, like, who's to blame? Because then it'll always be the other. It'll always be the other. And there's corruption everywhere. Yeah. Like there's corruption in my ability to see what's happening correctly and everybody else. It's just I happen to have adopted a habit of pointing out when I am biased or when I could potentially be wrong, just to keep me humble. And I don't think many other people have done it. I think more people are doing it now. And this is why I feel like everything that we're talking about right now, we are stepping into a brand new paradigm. And I think that news also has to change. It can't be so centralized.
It is changing.
It has to be more individual people.
Organically.
And I love that.
It's already doing it.
And I hope.
Yeah, that's what gives me so much of it. It's organically, it is happening. I see it, especially when you really get a pulse on the internet, independent media, alternative news. It's the reason Crystal and Sagar are blowing up and their new show's blowing up. Joe Rogan's blowing up. You know, people like Aubrey Marcus, like great, innovative, transformational speakers, people who really know how to cover the news authentically. People are yearning for that more than ever because they've been so inundated with just fake, phony, you know, here's Bob with the news, or welcome to KXR. It was like, all right, man, like, it's like teach his own. If you dig that, cool, you know, but like
it feels less relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
I get what you mean.
Exactly.
And nowadays, I hope that's what I love about this is like, you know, like them or lump them, you got like the Joe Rogans, the Lex Friedmans, and the people who are talking about this to millions of people. Russell Brand, you know, like you can go on and on. Like, you know, to me, I really like finding diverse voices to tell me what I already feel like I'm biased to believe anyway. You know, so Russell Brand tells me a lot of stuff that like, yeah, you know, that is how I feel. But I'm trying to find other voices. So I'm looking forward to news with diverse voices. And it doesn't have to be how we look at diversity today, but it should kind of follow. Like, I would love to hear what more women, Native American men and women, more people from different countries, people who are living under different governments, you know, different economic systems. I want to hear their news from their mouth. And that to me is where I'm starting to feel like everything's either it's China or it's Russia and we're looking for a boogeyman. It was the Middle East. It was Saddam Hussein. It was Osama bin Laden. There's always a boogeyman.
Next, it's aliens, probably. I mean, that's what.
Right.
You know.
And who controls who says who's the enemy? It's been centralized for far too long.
Yeah. I
have more in common with somebody in my tax bracket in China than I do from somebody outside my tax bracket here in the United States.
Yeah.
So
and that's where culture is so critical, because culture really does shape a lot of this even culture now probably shapes politics more than politics itself and policies, right? It's the cultural take on things. And if the culture is shaped by mainstream media and Hollywood, for instance, on aliens, and it's like the culture around this is be terrified, they're going to murder us, and pick up your weapons and be ready to defend Earth when they come. That's the cultural narrative they're shifting on that topic. You know, the cultural narrative on stuff with like missing money and all this is like, oh, these are probably just some crazy conspiracy theorists who don't understand economics, don't know what they're talking about, and are using, you know, false data or statistics and things like that. So, you know, once again, discern for yourself, you know thyself, be your own boss in a lot of ways, take sovereignty back. It doesn't mean you can't look to people and be like, oh, that's cool, I like that thought, you know, take bits and pieces where you want. But yeah, we got to break free of that groupthink. But at the same time, like, if we're so socially, like, already like designed to be social creatures, like, I'm also not like, okay, I'm maybe not every single one of us can become interdependent or independent. Like, maybe we're going to always have this groupthink element. Then let's make the groupthink a groupthink that is about like discernment. Like, let's make the groupthink one of self-correcting, one of, you know, this idea of like, how do you create a thriving regenerative ecosystem and a socioeconomic system? You have to have self-correcting mechanisms within it. To, like, for instance, a big protest, you need self-correcting mechanisms. One is, like I talked about, you need people to, whenever they see an agent saboteur, somebody trying to clearly discredit the entire movement, you need people to say, hey, not cool, and in the best nonviolent way, take that person and give them to the police or authorities to say, not a part of this, trying to discredit. Like, that's a beautiful design built into self-correct. Nature does this. Permaculture, like, study what we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Nature already has these amazing self-correcting systems. They move water around and nutrients and guide sunlight. They protect each other. They work together. It's a, you know, this beautifully symbiotic relationships through nature. Like, we need to do that. We need to be mutually symbiotic. And the only way we're really going to get to that point where we are going to act that way, really, I feel, is once we get enough people really understanding and feeling that we all are one. I mean, there has to be this sort of spiritual, almost philosophical, I think, component of this where we have to say, ingrained with all these systems, ingrained in the way we embody and act towards one another, has to be this idea of they're a part of me in some way. How directly I show that, and that's where psychedelics have really been amazing at helping people realize. You know, this is the whole thing is, you know, every politician should do shrooms so they get that realization, so that they go, oh, we're all really all connected to some degree, and maybe I should keep that in mind with anything I do, but that's not the case currently, you know? So
yeah, with a good set and setting, because I've seen people get the Messiah complex from not doing it correctly, but
that's part of it too. The new psychedelic renaissance, when we talked about, is we need the right practitioners giving it to people, helping them hold that set and setting. So we won't get into that, but it's all connected. It is all connected to some degree. It really is all. So continuing on though with Catherine here. So now she's going to jump into, let's see here. I'll just let it play.
Looking for the missing money.
Exactly.
And you're the only person who's ever come up with a logical explanation of where it's gone. Because if we're talking...
So this is huge.
During the housing bubble.
So this is huge, and this
what
is really...
was his logical explanation? Was it the reverse engineering or this ET phenomena? Is that what his explanation was for the missing money?
Yeah. So Catherine finds Dolan's work, I think early 2000s, but she comes across his work and she says, you know, for a long time, her whole issue was, okay, I found all this money missing. It's an insane amount. Where is it going? You know, where could this amount of money be going, and what could it be spent on that would justify it? Yeah. And so Dolan helped her answer that question.
I remember during the housing bubble, you know, I called it a financial coup d'etat. Because they bubbled the economy and were sucking huge amounts of money out.
Pump and dump.
Pump and dump. And everybody kept saying that Goldman Sachs is corrupt. This is not, you know, we're not talking here. When you talk about 6.5 trillion, we're not talking about buying offshore homes with Ferraris. You know, we're talking about spaceships.
Something more.
We're talking about underground bases. I told you one of my favorite quotes was from the London money manager who came to lunch. We had a luncheon in Europe, and he came and he said, you know, I could never understand how the mining and elevator companies we're making so much money.
Mm-hmm.
And then I listened to your interview with Richard Dolan, and now it all makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we have discussed this.
Yeah.
That's right. So, well, let me just take a moment then to jump in here and make a little contribution, because if someone's listening and they think this is insanity to think it's going into some kind of secret space program or something having to do with even more fringy topics than that, then I would just simply say
these are not fringy topics.
They're not, because $21 trillion
is not fringy.
This is an extreme financial situation. So we really do need to be looking outside the box, as it were, outside the small little conventional box to find out where is this money going. We have to. This is an entire massive, itself a global infrastructure. That's
we're talking
funded.
about building a civilization that is off balance sheet.
Off balance sheet.
This is an off balance sheet civilization.
You've mentioned, are we in an open or a closed financial system?
Right.
And you've said it looks like it's open.
It looks like it's open to me.
In other words, money's going out to some other place.
It's not just the money going out, but if you look at how we're financing it, part of the way we're financing it is we're issuing fantastic amounts of debt. I can get on government websites and I can add up who's issuing how much debt. I won't get the off-balance sheet U.S. debt, but I'll get a lot of good information. Try and figure out who owns the debt.
That's difficult to do.
It's impossible.
Impossible.
I've tried for years. I've hired researchers, some to do it. Maybe I'm missing something, but...
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, financially, I'm at baby steps compared with you, but I have tried over the years to get a sense of who owns what. And I just can't figure that out. Like if you look at the boards of directors of the top corporations, the top stockholders or shareholders, I can't figure this one out. Like I know that some of the major corporations are owned by other major corporations, but the question is, who are the individuals? You know that it's an interlocking directorate and interlocking shareholders probably, but who are these people? I've been looking for years of a way to find out who these people are. Is there a way to do this?
No. Ultimately, if you want to find out who owns what, it's not possible. I mean, you can estimate. But part of it is we are financing an entire off-balance sheet civilization. I mean, think of it, it's like the husband who has two families and two wives, and the two families and two wives, one doesn't know the other exists, and he's financing them out of one paycheck.
Wow. So it's a great metaphor there, but
yeah.
I mean, this is literally, this is like another entire United States existing, and just nobody knows about it, right? That amount of money is literally another whole GDP. Like it's like an entire world power, same size of U.S. basically, that exists, but nobody knows about it.
The obvious question is where, because like everyone would say, well, like where would they be? Is it just like scattered in and hidden in with the rest of the infrastructure? Is it beneath the ground? Is it off planet? Are the flat earthers right? And there's more continents beyond the sheet, ice sheet? Like that's where I'm wondering. Yes, the logical next question is, where is the money going? And then it's like, so it's the way they said it to say it's financing another civilization. Maybe it's not another civilization like we would wrap our heads around that, but like what is it actually doing is just such a very curious. And I like how, Dolan says it. He's just like, if you think UFOs and stuff like that is fringe, why aren't we talking about $21 trillion missing? Because most people, would they hear that and they're like, oh my God, corrupt politics, right? That's as far as our thought processes for the most part go, is, oh man, I knew, bankers were corrupt, but now I really know they're corrupt. No, this is beyond that. This isn't, you're right. She's not like, this is buying, a private island and something like that. This is the 21 trillion. Compare that to the GDP of every nation combined. That keeps up, right? That keeps up.
Yeah,
so
no, it surpasses it. The U.S. has, China's catching up, every year fast. They're like tripling our GDP, but still I think it's like total cumulative to this time. Like the U.S. for sure dominates. And this is the same level of
debt.
Total more now, right? So this is like a number one global superpower that nobody knows about, essentially, right? Behind the scenes, so it's like two Americas exist, and we're only seeing one version of it. And
so you're
the other
saying it's the Illuminati.
I'm not saying any of that, dude. I'm just saying, and look, and she made a good point there that's like interesting about like who owns all this stuff. And I've researched and tried to follow like who owns everything. And it's literally designed for you not to know, right? So you could speculate, like, let's go back historically and who really started these early central banking systems, who were the private individuals who had enough money, sort of robber barons, Europe's like wealthiest, Rothschilds, Rockefeller, Morgan types, like who would actually have the money to finance actual whole wars. And those people's names would come up a lot. And so people would then say, okay, I deduce that they're probably still the main people who are, the main shareholders of these private banking systems, because they are private banks. We don't have public banking. I'm actually an advocate for public banking. I think that's a good step in
Well,
our
and most
direction.
of those people aren't alive anymore, so they had to pass it on.
Oh yeah,
And
and
do they just pass it on like old times to their children, or
Yeah.
do they pass it on to other people that they knew and trusted well? Were they themselves in the pocket of somebody else? Those are other questions that need to come
Well,
up.
as far as like they can create these massive trusts to pass it on without it being taxed, and there's all these fancy ways you can obviously not get taxed, and so that's easy. They know that. They have armies of lawyers and accountants to handle that. But they, a big thing that I've heard that I think is pretty true is that definitely a lot of these like royal families and elite families do marry within. So it's almost to the point of like marrying your third cousin type, but like it's all because you want to maintain a pure bloodline. You want to maintain a sense of it's like royalty. You want to maintain this lineage. At the same time, a part of this basically like cult like psychology of like stick to the party line, stick to the ideology. And Catherine talks about like that. There's, it seems like there's an inner circle, right? This idea of like the Council of Nine, and you hear these things like, the steering committee at the Bilderberg conference or the Council of Foreign Relations. You'll see that there are upper echelons within elite meetings. And, that tends to make you think that those are probably more people who really are calling the bigger shots. And then it is a system of divvying out orders to sort of the minions. And, Catherine obviously talked about in the last episode of how once you do get sort of banished from this club, as George Carlin famously said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Once you're banished from this club, it's really like you're exiled. And there's a certain ideology that everyone's down with and knows that if you challenge, you could have some issue. And once she started challenging that, she lost a bunch of friends and people just completely didn't respond to her. And it really is just this, you become a black sheep. So, there's ways of maintaining secrecy, just as far as like you all go to extremely wealthy boarding schools, you live in private gated communities, you never literally interact with the outside world for the most part. Then as you own massive corporations that are transnational, that it can get over, certain governmental laws because they can do things internationally. It's all these things where you just have to really understand and look at it macroscopically and go, okay, how, for this to be possible, let's reverse engineer it. How would I have to design it? And a lot of things you start to see get checked off. Well, I would need the banking system to be this way. I would need the government and the secrecy to be this way. All the things you start to see, like, this didn't happen overnight. There was many, many things she pointed out in the last episode. We went into the history more. You had to put in place in order to exploit and dupe the masses, right? That's the only way. We're not going to be cool with this if we knew about it. The masses.
No, and it's
like,
not
what?
a mob that came over. To me, there's competing ideologies. One is that an Illuminati-like mob came into an otherwise well-meaning for the time, because all governments are great to some people and hideous to others, but like that something came in like a parasite. And others believe that the whole thing was built by the perpetrators themselves. Why do you think the legal system and legalese is so difficult to understand that it's literally a judge will not hear you? And that is a legal term. They will not hear you if you try and represent yourself without abiding by a certain language, and you can get, what do you call that? Contempt of court and stuff like that. You could be the most Socratic and logical person in the world, but if you don't know the key words, it's kind of like Pee Wee Herman's thing won't go off and people won't start screaming if you don't say the right words. And so like the entire thing must have been built by the perpetrators themselves.
Tellinger does an amazing whole synopsis on this idea, and this is what really convinced me to look at his idea of Ubuntu seriously. He did his whole speech, and it should be online, but he has multiple presentations, but he did one all about the history of money. And, I had not been too long out of working in the financial system at Merrill Lynch, and I really did see certain elements of this, but I had never really done a full deep dive analysis on the history of money. I mean, going back to Babylon, Sumeria, like the advent of fiat currency, the advent of these initial systems. And his whole thing is that, money, just the sheer presence of money is evil. So, I was taught, okay, money has, 6 or 7 characteristics. It's a store of value. It's a medium of exchange. Like, it's obviously like, it's more convenient to give a guy $20 and be like, hey, here's 20 sheep for 20 pieces of lumber. Like, so you get it like, okay, yeah, that makes sense like that. But But when and it doesn't mean we can't create, I just saw in the Discord, people were talking about resource-based economies, and the key really is implementation. And there's a lot of great solutions out there, Zeitgeist and Ubuntu, Venus Project. The key is always implementation. And they've designed a system to make it extremely, extremely, to almost impossible to implement a new idea. So it's like, can we implement the new idea within that system? I don't know. Does it mean we have to basically kind of take apart key parts of that system, and then that will allow the implementation? Maybe that's the situation. I don't know 100%, but the system is designed very much to continue to have more and more income inequality, to continue to have more and more market consolidation. It's very much designed by and for the elites. It's not designed by and for the masses. That's what we're sold. It's kind of, socialism for the rich and hard, extreme libertarian capitalism for the poor. And so you see all these paradoxes within the system, and you hear these these platitudes from politicians saying, oh yeah, we hear you in this and this, but then you look at the way they vote, and you look at the way our budget is put together, and you see a disconnect. And I think everyone is really, really aware to that now more than ever for many reasons. But we can harness that in a loving, positive way. We can harness all that, anti-establishment populist rhetoric on the left and right. That's what, Crystal and Saga are doing beautifully. That's what Joe's doing, whether he knows it or not. This is an organic thing happening. There are many figureheads and voices helping to bring it together. It's growing. There's momentum. There's urgency. There's a liveliness. You feel it, like you said, something's going on. But okay, what are we going to do? What's sort of the next key thing is, okay, do we just continue to allow organic things and just each do his own? I don't know 100%. But the key is just the more we can get things implemented in the private and public sector, whether it's mass mobilization, whether it's creating benefit corporations, that's anything that goes in that direction towards sort of the better end goal we all want. That's what I'm for. You can't approach this kind of massive problem and say, this is ideally what we want, and we're going to get there exactly this way. You just kind of got to be let's just throw stuff at the wall. What's working, let's keep working with that. And if it's not working, we got to be able to adapt and shift, because this is a chess game in a lot of ways. We make one move, they're making another. It's a very much this idea of kind of 4D, 5D chess. You got to be thinking ahead. If they do this, then what? With your channel right now, as more and more independent alternative media talks about UFOs and UAPs and exposing truth to power, the more they're getting terrified, the more they want to maybe push censorship, whether it's left or right. And people are being censored on the left and right. I just really want to put that out there. People on the left say it's all right with people. People on the right say it's only right. No, people on the right say it's only right, and people on the left say it's only the bottom line is both sides. I can give you hard examples are being censored. It's not really about necessarily even partisanship. It's about anybody speaking truth to power is considered a threat because the last thing they want is people, an educated, large-scale group of people really saying enough is enough in a non-direct, violent ways. My whole shtick, the Dr. King philosophy. But
yeah, I like that. I like that you went on that tangent. There's a couple things that it makes me think of, and that's I won't even get long-winded with it. It's really just that I feel like a brand new form of government, and potentially, some say that the NWO is going to bring in a one world government, a one world religion, a one world, economy, all those things. It'll all be consolidated. And there are some people who are like, you mean unity? What's so wrong with that? And then everyone who has a problem with it is like, well, it's the implementation. Who do you think is going to be in charge? Is it really going to run like that, deep down beneath the surface? I'm even really curious, I don't know many people who really even understand what anarchy would look like in its most utopian or ideal form, because this is where words start to break down. What's your understanding of anarchy?
I've looked into a lot of these sort of political ideologies, and I Chomsky is somebody I really do respect a lot of his opinions, and he's an anarchist syndicalist. I think I was confused how you say it, but he's very much an anarchist. Some people are kind of surprised a lot of times when they hear that, Chomsky. They think he's just sort of probably some hardcore leftist, almost socialist, but he's an anarchist syndicalist. And I looked at some videos of, I think Zeitgeist is big into anarchy. Peter Joseph, I think he's big into it, and some other people about there is a misconception about how it works. People have the conception that anarchy would just be oh, it's going to be chaos. It'll be like Mad Max. Everyone will just be fighting.
Yeah, think of the archetypal person who's an anarchist. That's what pops into people's mind when they
Right.
hear the word anarchy.
They just want to smash and burn, and they've got the big A and right. But anarchy, look, every system is capable of being flawed, right? And I don't think anybody has. I think it's probably going to happen organically. I don't think it's going to be like, okay, here's the perfect system, we just got to put it into place, right? Like, I think we just probably going to take really good ideas and integrate them, and eventually we'll get to a system, hopefully that is leading to the outcomes we want. But anarchy, ideally, they would be basically like they'd say there'd be like small. You'd have individualism. It obviously is very much about sovereignty and individualism, but you also are part of a community. So like you would have like, it's very much local, decentralized. It's very much like our group in this decentralized area would protect each other, would sell and barter and work together. And it's very much, this idea of sort of co-ops in decentralized places all over the world, but they could be part of a network. I look like, I get that, but in a lot of ways, like I sometimes look at these things and I'm like, well, this kind of seems like where we came from. Like we sort of were this already. We had, hunter-gatherers, and we came sort of the agrarian revolution, and you had slowly more and more bigger cities, but it was sort of that way for a while. And then we created, like, I don't think any ism right now is really the answer. I don't think we have the full answer. And I don't think any resource-based economy is fully gotten it right yet. I think there's some really good ideas from all of them, but I think that's part of like, if we make this a cooperative process, if we make it so it's like, hey, what do you think? And what do we like all, overwhelmingly think is the best steps? Like if you make this more where the people feel they have a voice, like this is why people love America. The founding fathers, like we're so like, so many people when we first reformed America, they looked to us and took a lot of example from it because it was of the people, for the people, by the people. It was truly meant to be, really almost this direct democracy. It's really a government truly for, run, and by the people. And the politicians were really supposed to be more administrators. They were just really supposed to like administrate and take care of like and representing our voice. But slowly it's the people have gotten less and less power. Princeton did an amazing study on this, and really it's a small select group of elites who really, when they want something done, it's done. It's voted on. And when they don't, it's not.
They're better at the law of manifestation, the law of attraction. And like, just to give you, and you actually made my point. We've been there with anarchy, but we were there as a far more disconnected, smaller population type of world where you're coming across a different band or tribe in the woods, and you had to wonder whether you could trust these people or not. In a far more densely populated world, anarchy looks completely different. So does capitalism. Right. So does any ism. Right. But here's what Google says about anarchy. It's a state of disorder due to absence or non-recognition of authority. So they're outright saying it will not work. In its very definition, it's something that doesn't work, which I think is absolutely wrong. Oligarchy definition is a small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution. And to me, that's what everyone feels like we're moving back into. That's the big fear. We're moving back into small group of people.
I think we're already there. Power. I think we're already in an oligarchy. We've
been there. The thing is the isms are part of the narrative to get our heads in different categorical ways of thinking. Right. Because if you can put the right categorical economic model over people's heads, then all of a sudden they're like, it's like that none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free. Yeah. So, and who was it? Aldous Huxley said, if, and I'm loosely paraphrasing, if you outwardly oppress people, they will revolt. If people don't realize they're being oppressed and they just call this the way that the world is, they won't revolt. So how do you get the people to accept and enough bread and circuses? This is something that's been being worked on for thousands of years.
It's cracking,
these economic models.
It's cracking. I think that's what we're experiencing.
That's the grand point. What? To what? And this is the curious part. There's no answer to that yet. That's a rhetorical question. And I want to get on with Catherine Austin Fitts. But I find what's happening here with the money missing, with the way that everything seems like it's breaking down, with the Great Reset saying we need to use COVID-19 as the opportunity for us to shift into a greener way of thinking. And then the opposers are saying, no, this is a technocratic, open air prison, run from outer space. And that was Catherine Austin Fitts saying that. And that was also Alison McDowell saying that. So it's really interesting because to me, I also I guess the grand point, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long to get to these points. The grand point is, as we move into the future, whether it's going to go well or it's not going to go well, I think has most to do with what most people are willing to trust. Are we willing to trust that the world is capable of getting better, or is everyone going to screw us at every turn? Is it going to be like The Walking Dead, where you're just trying to survive the zombies, and now you realize it's the people, when you take their government off of them and you take the penalties away from them for being horrific, that we will just consume each other again? I think that's the narrative we need to get over, is this idea that once shit hits the fan or supply chains run down, we will kill, loot, and that's what we're being shown on TV. Is that there's inequality, we'll take to the streets, burn stuff to the ground, blah, 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 blah. And like, not that is a representative of where everyone's head is at, but that's the narrative that keeps running through people's heads, whether it be Hollywood or the mainstream media. So before, I just wanted to say that we can definitely move on. But, I feel like we need to really turn over this. What does trust look like, and how will it get better? Would we be able to recognize a solution if it was standing right in front of us? Because most of us don't trust anything anymore. I think that's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah. And people trust leaders. And our leaders have really failed on a lot of accounts. And with new leaders, my hope is that we get new, better leaders who will trust other leaders and be the voice. Look, people listen to people within their in-group. So, if the leader of your in-group is trusting another group and saying, hey, we can work with them, we've got to, give this peace pipe, we've got to give this branch to try to do this. That's really where leadership needs to come in and say, look, we might not agree on everything, but we've got to work together. And people need their leaders to really step up and do principled action, not just party line bullshit anymore. Do what's best on a principled, ethical standpoint for the people, not just for your career or your ego or any materialistic outcome. This idea of a career politician needs to stop. We need to eliminate that concept in many ways, whether that's shortening terms, whether that's getting money out of politics. There's various ways, but we need to incentivize leaders to do what's best for the people again in a lot of ways. So
Israel and Palestine is an example of, oh no, I'm looking at the YouTube thing. I saw your mouth moving and you weren't talking. But I guess what I was saying was just like, when we look at what is called the swamp, I mean, that's just a model, a way of talking about like politics from one person who really triggered a lot of people. But if you look at the swamp, if it dries out, right, and then you dump fresh water back into it, how long before it turns back into a swamp? At what point does the swamp need to turn into running water? Like, there needs to be an entire paradigm shift. And I think this is where all this UFO, UAP stuff is headed. Something huge needs to happen for us to change the swamp into a flowing river.
Yeah.
Because we need like $21 trillion to change it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
no, we're at a point where I'm like, look, it's either a major catalyst or it's people pulling off a mass mobilization like a Yellow Vest movement, right? Because it's that point of radical systemic change that needs to happen. And really, it's only those two things that are going to cause that. Some either mass mobilization, a major catalyst like a UAP type thing becoming more mainstream, and like a diplomatic relation starting, or we just incrementally, organically change enough over time. But do we have enough time to organically wait that long with the way things are going? I'm not even just talking the environment, just like, economics, there's a lot of things. So both are possible though. Mass mobilization is doable. We already saw it, like I said, in France. We can do it in America. We have certain versions. We'd have to create a new type of movement, like a poor people's party, just getting the 99% to march versus the 1%, to make it some generic thing of just like, look, like, we just feel like the masses have been left behind and have a very specific set of demands like the Yellow Vest did, and that everyone agrees on, and they might disagree on other smaller social issues and stuff. But it's either something like that, a major catalyst, And past that, it's tough to really say realistically what would have enough of an effect for how deep it's,
Because this is a thought experiment in motion, I'm gonna add one more thing to it. Say we got the 99% to March today.
Well, not even the 99%, just say 60, 70, 80.
Okay, yeah, like I get you, and I want to carry on this thought experiment. Say we got 60% of the disenfranchised population to March. Has the potential of being beautiful. Has the potential to be amazing. If it's decentralized truly, right. I do feel like we are a species that does look for harmony. Like as much as it looks like we will eat each other without government, we are people who seek harmony. You look at the way rainbow gatherings form. If there's a fight that breaks out, it is incumbent upon the biggest, most capable person there to bring harmony back to the situation. Right? Because we don't like those bursts of chaos. Sometimes people get off on that for sure. And sometimes a fire is necessary to destroy what used to be for what may be. If we were to get 60% of the people to march tomorrow, would it be pretty?
It depends on the leadership. It depends on the organization. It depends on the people saying what we're marching for. I mean, look, it's a difference between, a Dr. King march and maybe a Malcolm X march. I mean, Malcolm X was very much like Black Panthers. Violence is okay to use. Dr. King was the opposite, right? And they were at odds at times, but sometimes they would find common ground, and it was beautiful. But if the leaders of the march are saying, yeah, violence is totally cool and justified and all that, then yeah, it's gonna get nasty and violent. But that's why I really keep pointing to the yellow vests. Their whole prerogative is like, we've got a referendum initiated for the citizens. We have 10 things we want. We're not gonna get violent. We're gonna it's gonna suck at times when they're shooting tear gas and all this, but it's gonna show to the masses how messed up and screwed up it is that they're shooting at unarmed protesters. And anytime there is somebody who is a bad egg, whether it's just organically a bad egg or somebody who's been hired to be a bad egg, we will have a self-correcting mechanism to deal with them. We will say, hey, take this guy. He's not a part of our ideology and what we're about. He's trying to mess it up. And you have to have that kind of organizational discipline. What makes a really effective protest? We could do a whole series on. I know some, I forget her name, but this is like her whole shtick. But yeah, I mean, that's what's critical. I mean, when you get a bunch of people together, it can go beautifully and peacefully, or it can go really bad. And that's where, you've got to have good leadership. Because it makes
me feel like what you're talking about there is the story has to be, and not just the story, the reason, the motivating factor has to be so authentic that people know how not to lose sight of it.
Yeah.
In large groups, because we lose sight of ourselves in large groups. Every one of us acts different around some friends than other friends. Different age groups, we act different. So it has to be so viral. It's like a chemical change rather than a structural change. It's this, or a viral in both biological and digital terms. It's something that people need to, once they hear it, it resonates so deeply that they're
ethos. A real ethos. Like, it's got to be a new ethos, a new way of thinking, right? It's got to be that level of integration to where this is a new ethos. We are coming together for something so beautiful that we believe in, that's bigger than us, that, we might have some disagreement on smaller stuff, but the overall big picture, and this is where you need good branding and marketing, not to use some like business spiel here, but like, you need to get people to understand that ethos, it to be articulated properly, to have good media, to make it cool to care and fun to learn type thing. But you need to have an ethos in that collective that is of these important principles things. This is like Burning Man. Like, how do you get 10,000 plus people in the middle of desert to have this incredible, I mean, and it has its flaws, but like, look, they have these Burning Man principles, the 12 principles of self-radical honesty, and I used to know them much better, but like,
and 70,000 people, by the way, 70 to 100,000.
So that it's doable. We have proofs of concept, but you need to have it designed well. Design is so crucial. Design on the micro level and the macroscopic level, and designing movements, designing these new systems. A lot of people, they're like, okay, I just want to burn it down. And it's like, okay, cool, but what's your game plan once you burn it down, right? And that needs to be the ethos of like, we want this to change because we want this to be the new thing. This is what we want to be in place, and these things to be taken to change that old system and start shifting it to a new system. Some a little bit more radical than others, but there has to be a lot of clarity. There has to be a lot of transparency over the leadership and things being made so people trust it, like you said, and all these things. But it's very doable, and it's been done in the past, and we can do it again. We've got to just stop. You got to turn off the mainstream media, a big part of it, because they're going to continue to hate the other. And you got to find more unified content. You got to start saying, you know what? Was I getting a little played with this or this point? Maybe I should, just be brutally honest but unconditionally loving with yourself and go, okay, like what do I maybe need to adjust how I think about? And do it with a certain person or in a space where that's allowed. Because I get it. If you're doing it with somebody who's attacking you and judging you and guilting you for ever thinking that way, you're not gonna want to change your mind. You're going to get more rooted and say, no, I'm not going to want to ever change. So there's a lot of moving parts, but
there are. And I feel like we could go down that.
That'll be another whole series. Yeah. So we'll leave it there.
That'll be another whole series, because there's stuff I want to say about that when it comes to AI having a role to play in the future of governance and open source and decentralized or distributed data. So there's a lot more transparency that can't be faked unless we're streamlining deep fakes nonstop.
We'll do
which I bet you were already doing that. We'll have to do something like
a systemic design series or something.
Let's do it. So let's hop back in. Yeah.
Here Dolan is. Let's just see, because I forget exactly what part they're at.
Understand how control is engineered in our society without grappling with UFO phenomena. That's why this integration has to happen, and why all the little tricks they've used to keep the world from being willing to go there.
Yeah.
I mean, the key to control and the key to secrecy is if you can get the entire financial world and every investor to engage in material emissions. We're spending 21 trillion over here, but we're not going to look at it. It doesn't exist. That's a material emission. It depends on material emissions. When you rip up the material emissions, then you can start diving in and integrating.
I'm gratified to hear you say this for obvious reasons. I have been working on UFO research for many years, and it's clearly very expensive. Like everything points to it being an expensive operation, and yet it's completely off limits to respectable conversations in academia.
So we'll jump real quick right into the next segment, but a key thing she's hitting on here, though, is you need material emissions. So whether that's mainstream news outlets, whether that's people in powerful positions in the private and public sector, you need to have material emissions, meaning you literally are omitting critical material evidence and things that we're talking about. So as we said, you do need to have these key things in place for this to be pulled off. And it's critical for people to understand that. So they go, how could this ever be this way in the first place? Material emissions is a big one. So kind of moving things real quick to the next one.
It's pure speculation as to how much goes where. But in addition to all sorts of underground facilities or, space programs, what you have is the need for the equivalent of a financial endowment. I think what I call the financial coup d'etat started in the early 90s, commensurate with globalization. Mm-hmm. And I believe the reason that it did was they decided that they needed to create very significant engineering capacity to help us become a multiplanetary civilization. In other words, the reason we globalized was so, in fact, we could quickly become a multiplanetary civilization. And commensurate with that, they took a look at the G7 developed nations and said, we can't afford to spend $35 trillion on nursing homes. We need to take that money now and put it aside to really make sure that we are successful as a civilization, including doing all these things. And so they literally bubbled the economy. Mm-hmm. They globalized. They, because at that time you could get a fantastic engineer in Asia for $10,000 that would cost you $200,000 a year. And they globalized, and part of that was the economics, but they sucked out a huge amount of money, because if you steal enough money, Richard, at a 5 or 10% interest rate or dividend, you've now created enough money annually to run the global government.
Right, a secret endowment of trillions of dollars that gives dividends of maybe $1 trillion a year, who knows, whatever. If you've got a classified endowment of $20 trillion, you're saying you can generate dividends that would actually run a massive infrastructure.
I suspect what the endowment is a reserve fund. So, for example, if you issue bonds, if you're a municipality, you issue bonds, you have a reserve fund so that if there's a hiccup in revenues, you don't default on the bonds. You can take it out of the reserve fund, and then you replenish the reserve fund. So my guess is they've created an endowment that is a layer that makes it the whole situation from a project management situation, much more stable than it would be if you're depending on tax flows, and the economy is going up and down, or the population's getting...
Where would this endowment be? Like, what banking system, where would it reside? How...
It would be right in your face. In other words, John Rappaport was at a great speech where he described all these different franchises and sort of stores around a city corner.
Right.
And he traced it all back, and this one went to Fidelity and this one went to Vanguard, but they were just managing money for and so I forget what the name of the guy was. Harry, let's call him Harry. But
right.
Harry basically owned everything on the whole block, but nobody knew it because it was, so I think what you're talking about is shifting money into stocks and bonds and basically buying up positions and in a variety of these different companies.
So the money in possibilities that it's actually floating around in our global economy somewhere. Somehow.
I would say some of it is.
Yeah.
I would say some of it is. I mean, if you look at the question of what we're investing in terms of spaceships, underground bases, all these different things,
right.
The question is, where are we making that, and how are we making it without kicking off inflation? My guess is another reason to globalize is you can deflate the value of labor. It can offset monetary inflation and the other inflation you kick off. New technology and globalization of labor can deflate tremendously and protect you from kicking
It's reducing
off.
Your costs.
Right.
You basically get near slave labor, essentially, of of all kinds of things. So it gives you a lot of flexibility.
Right. Well, the danger is, how can you build all this stuff and do all this stuff without triggering inflation? And when you talk about missing money, for years now, people will say, well, it can't go missing because if it really was that much money would go missing, it would trigger inflation. No, if you look at, I think my guess as to where it's gone and what it's done, you can do it without triggering inflation if you globalize.
That's fair.
If you globalize. So, and I know we're probably going to wrap here soon, but there's still some more. We just got through about half. So, we still got plenty more depending on if we get a guest booked next week or not.
Working on Danny Sheehan, everyone.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. He's a legal expert and has an amazing perspective on this over the years. And one of my go-tos was pivotal for me in this whole subject matter. It's about as credible as it gets, Harvard Law, constitutional lawyer. But as you said there, the key part of this is obviously understanding inflation, how you do it, globalization. The more you really do look into this and understand it, on the surface, it can be easy to say, oh, that's outrageous and crazy. And if that was the case, well, we'd have hyperinflation. We know about it, these classic things. And then when you really look into it and you go, well, actually, maybe it is doable if you did this and this and this. And then you look and you go, well, it looks like they kind of actually did do this and this and this. So, And so it's a lot, obviously. It's dense, but it's so critical. I mean, following the money is 101.
She said multi-planet civilization. I find that interesting because, let's be honest. 100 years ago, if you believe the numbers, the population wasn't even half of what it is today. So that's 100 years. What are we going to, what does that look like in 10, 20? I mean, so many people are saying, you could either point at the climate, you can point at China, you can point at deforestation, a number of different factors. But in the next, let's just say 30 years, a lot is going to happen. A lot is going to change on this planet. Potentially, this is also a very big push towards where's more real estate. I don't 100%. I mean, I know we're talking about Mars. I don't know 100% how close, realistic, or whatever we are to that. Elon Musk says a matter of a couple of years. Mm-hmm. To me, that could be so ambitious. It could mean a couple decades or 50 years. Who the hell knows? Maybe never. Some people don't even believe in Mars. But I guess the main thing is when we're trying to figure out where did this money go, what is it in support of? I like the way she's looking at it because she's like, potentially it's not just 21 trillion cash. We're going to pay for a $21 trillion Tesla or something like that. It's going to be something probably smarter like that. This is going to be a 40, 50-year project in the minimum. And we need to find a way to make that make sense that doesn't trigger inflation, but also doesn't raise a lot of red flags and can largely go if we maintain, control with the mainstream media. We'll just come up with an excuse and people will buy it because historically they do. Yeah. Critical mass always buys it because they just want to get along.
These are very intelligent people. I mean, this is a very intricate, well thought out plan. And whether you like them or not, most of you probably don't like them, obviously, because it's very, messed up what they're doing. But you got to give them credit. This is pretty ingenious. This is some Machiavellian, like evil genius type stuff that, you know, they bided their time. They didn't do it overnight. They were smart about when and how they played their hand and when they were more aggressive and not. And, you know, it's something where we, you know, I just look at how much positive, once we deal with this, you know, truly the sky is the limit. I mean, it unburdens us from so much BS of the shackles of economic hardship that is false and just phony and doesn't really need to exist. And, you know, I truly believe, to kind of wrap here, in this idea that comes from Ubuntu, sort of taking bits and pieces from everything that I've looked at. You know, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I truly believe we can get to a point where our systems and our planet is designed in a way where what you're passionate about, what you love, what you enjoy doing, you are compensated and you're rewarded in some way, a part of a larger community. You have fulfillment. You truly feel you matter within a larger community. And I truly feel we can get to this sort of Star Trek type civilization where we transcend past money, where we transcend past war and poverty and these things like they talk about in the show. We can get there. It might not be extremely easy. That's part of the journey, though. Embrace the process, and it'll little bit, you know, that's kind of, you feel like if you have a calling for being here, like this is a precipice point. We truly feel that. I truly feel we can get to that more ideal type of civilization. I mean, not exactly like that, but it's going to take a lot of things we talked about, and it doesn't have to be everyone, but I do look at this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to drop a lot of the BS that a lot of people are experiencing on a lot of levels and allow us to really be empowered and enter a new, basically it's an evolutionary leap. It's really that scale. It has to be. I mean, this is that level.
Talks about what is like the, man, I'm forgetting the terms he uses for different stages of civilization.
Right, type 1 and type 2 or...
Yeah. So the different types. And like we're at that point, and I hear technologists talking about this all the time. Like there's a certain point where, you know, population density leads to more innovation, leads to higher organizational structures of the way people come together, exactly like it is. And it makes sense in those ways as well. And it always has some corruption in it, you know, the same level as to the people's input, input to that.
Yeah.
And so I guess like we really kind of showed like where we're at with population density on the planet. All the projections say this is where you become multiplanetary.
Right.
All the projections say.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, you know, at that point, it's like, I think you said it best, like know thyself. And it's really about this discernment, but not just discernment in the outer world, but discerning your own worth. What are we trusting? To trust what's coming. How could you? Do you want to trust what's coming? Because most people, they feel so scared, they don't think that they even want to trust what's coming. It's easier to just not trust and get burned again, like in relationships. It's easier to just become cynical. A cat lady than ever trust another man. And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I mean, like there's a lot of trauma there for people in not trusting what's coming in large scale change. They'll never trust it.
Because they got burned.
But can you guarantee that you will ever move into a brighter future if we don't work on what trust really is, and being able to trust not other people, will they do the right thing? I think that's the wrong way to frame it. Real trust is knowing that even good people have weak moments, and even weak people have good moments, however you want to name it. And I think you're right. The structure of the system and how well we know how to trust what you want. I want goodness. I mean, I want Spock. Give me Spock. Give me that Star Trek future. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. That's a really good point to end on. And I have to say thank you to a couple people.
Yeah. Sure.
Mike George donated 5. Sean Foote, good friend of mine, donated 10. These are people that I know and love, and I just want to thank you, and also thank everybody else who's just giving your wisdom, giving your thoughts. And somebody mentioned something about a book. The Loosh wrote in the book Far Journeys by Robert Monroe. He says, I recommend having a look for...
Of the Monroe Institute? I know Robert Monroe with the Monroe Institute.
It says, I recommend having a look for a completely different overview on these topics. It's a chapter around page 270. We'll look into that, escape velocity, threw that out there. So I just want to say, thank you to everyone for coming in and checking this stuff out, really like dialing into the conversation. I'm absolutely loving these chats and these, with you, Gordo, and also with the chat in YouTube. So I appreciate it. We'll be back next Thursday. I'm going out to LA tomorrow morning, and then I'll be back. And so I'm sure I'll have stories, and the world will have stories, and we'll wrap.
Yeah. All right, brother. Much love, everyone.
Well, everyone, much love. Catch you guys next time.